Good morning to you, and thank you for finding time to be with us this morning. The show is Good Morning Africa. My name is Miriam Ogutu, and it is nice to have you join us. Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're tuned in and watching us from. On the show, I'm going to bring you the latest news from across the continent of Africa, and we shall start with the latest news headlines on the local newspaper CN Kenya, and then others from across the continent. We start with the Standard newspaper, the main headline, Deadlock in Ruto-Raila power battle. Which is the majority party or coalition? That is the elephant in the room that even Speaker Wetangula needed time to deliberate on it as Kenya Kwanza and Azimio leaders made their case in the National Assembly. That is on page 6, and I think they've just quoted there Kimani Ichung'wah and Opiyo Wandayi. Let me just read that through. What Kimani Ichung'wah said: the registrar of political parties allowed for Azimio to field individual candidates. There was only one candidate that ran as an Azimio candidate, complete with the emblem, and that was Raila Odinga and his running mate Martha Karua. Azimio party is not a coalition. Okay, and then this is what Opiyo Wandayi said. Upon the confirmation by the registrar of political parties and the law, the Speaker is expected to convey that Azimio is the majority party. Any other thing is nothing but hot air. As far as we are concerned, Azimio is both a coalition and a coalition party. Okay, so obviously a battle is looming in Parliament. Opinions split on Cabinet's GMO ban lift. Experts are divided on the decision to lift ban on genetically modified organisms. Some have lauded the move, while others urged caution. That story is on page 8 and 9. Tweeting General Stars Nairobi Kampala ties. The story is on page 4. To succeed, address the part. That is on page 14 and 15. Trump book makes key revelations. That is on page 27. And for Chelsea, third time is the charm. That is on the sports page on page 40 on the Standard newspaper. The Star newspaper, new DCI tells of DP Gachagua over investigation style. Multi-agency squad to oversee implementation of audit recommendations. The new DCI is already telling of DP. Okay, that story is on page 4 and 5 on the Star newspaper. And families squabbles rear ugly head as Gisheru's mother skips son's mass. That story is on page 2. Wetangula puts off decision on majority House majority, that is the National Assembly Speaker Moses Wetangula, has delayed formation of the House Business Committee as he retreats to settle the question of the majority. In the 13th Parliament, the Speaker said he received conflicting communications from Kenya Kwanza and Azimio camps. That is on page 6. What lifting of GMO ban means to food security. President William Ruto on Monday lifted a 10-year-long ban on import and cultivation of genetically modified white maize. He said the move will help feed the drought-stricken counties where more than 4 million people are on the brink of starvation. That is on page 7. Job losses mount as spending bills bury companies. That story is on page 11. And of course, the main pictorial there is Museveni's son Twitter outburst sparks diplomatic jitters, and that is Uganda President Yoweri Museveni and his son General Muhoozi Kainerugaba. They are the ones there on the front page. Okay, the Daily Nation. The main headline, Museveni's move to tame wild son. Rebel, rouser or rogue general, it is all fun and games, they say, until someone loses an eye. And so what started off on Monday as playful Twitter banter by Uganda military boss and President Museveni's son Muhoozi Kainerugaba had by last evening thrashed Nairobi and Kampala into an awkward diplomatic row as Kenya's High Commissioner in Kampala and Uganda's Foreign Affairs Ministry screwed to extinguish the fires of the threats by Muhoozi to run over Nairobi in 2 weeks. That story is on page 2 and 3. Wetangula to rule on House majority fight. I think we've read that from the other papers, so I'll not read the subtitles there. Let's see what else we have from across the continent of Africa, and we start with Uganda. What next for General Muhoozi? Okay, that is the main headline on the New Vision. And the Daily Monitor, also from Uganda, Muhoozi dropped, picked up. Very interesting. I have the details on the other news, and I'll tell you what that means. And then we have the Bukede. I guess this is also from Uganda, and Muhoozi. It's written in Baganda. I can't read that. Someone sent me this. I can't read that. I'm unable to understand the language, but it has to do with that, diplomatic star that President's son coast there, Museveni's son coast there. The Guardian from Nigeria, strike, federal government weakens, ASUU registers rival union. The Nation, also from Nigeria, PDP crisis, BOT's move to unite, Atiku week collapses. The Guardian from the UK, Tory turmoil amid claims of coup to oust Truss. That is too soon. The Daily Telegraph, disruption is the price of success, Prime Minister insists. The News Day from Zimbabwe, COVID-19 card scam surfaces. And the Daily News, also from Zimbabwe, Minister puffs up Chamisa on unity, but wants CCC leader to do more to move Zimbabwe forward. And I think that is what we have on some of the newspapers. I've not had any today from Tanzania, but that is what we have from some of the newspapers from across Africa and others from outside. So let me just bring us some news elsewhere. And from Nigeria, police in Nigeria say gunmen have shot dead at least 12 people and stolen dozens of cattle in the northeastern state of Taraba. Residents say some of the attackers were disguised as local security guards during the raid of the remote village in Mabuzen. They pretended to be searching for fleeing armed criminals and asked members of the community to come out and help with the search. But the attackers then opened fire on the crowd. 4 people have been arrested in connection with the raid. Nigeria is grappling with a wave of violence, but armed criminal gangs as well as Islamist insurgents. We go to South Sudan, and health officials are testing samples from 5 people to see if they have contracted the Ebola virus. The suspected cases were detected in 3 regional states bordering neighboring Uganda and Democratic Republic of Congo. Local media have reported Uganda is currently dealing with an outbreak of the hemorrhagic fever. 43 cases have been confirmed and 9 deaths have been recorded. But in South Sudan, no case has been confirmed so far. Mabior Kir, the head of the Planning and Information at the Public Health Emergency Operations Center, told reporters in the capital, Juba, that one suspected case was detected in eastern Equatoria State's Nimule town on the border with Uganda. One case was from Yambio, a capital of Western Equatoria State, which borders Democratic Republic of Congo. The remaining 3 cases were detected in Yei and Kajokeji, towns in central Equatoria State, which also shares a border with DRC and also Uganda. And we head to Zimbabwe, and police say they are investigating an arson attack on the home of Saibeth Musengezi, who is mounting a legal challenge against President Emmerson Mnangagwa's 2017 rise to power. The case was due to begin on Monday, but Mr. Musengezi's lawyer told the BBC that the matter was removed from the court roll pending the outcome of the appeal against 2 other parties joining the case. Mr. Musengezi, who says he is a ZANU-PF member, said his house was attacked by 4 men with their faces covered. They threw an incendiary object into his vehicle and into his house. He and his family were unharmed, but 1 room and his vehicle were damaged. He said while the police should be allowed to conduct the investigations, he believed the motive was political. Last October, he lodged a case challenging the legality of ZANU-PF's central meeting that appointed Mr. Mnangagwa as party leader after Robert Mugabe was ousted in 2017. Mr. Musengezi argues the party did not follow its own constitution and that Mr. Mnangagwa is not the legitimate head of the party. We go to Burkina Faso, and the ousted military leader of Burkina Faso left the country and is now in Togo. Colonel Paul Henry Damiba, who had been in power for 8 months, formally resigned on Sunday, 2 days after being toppled by a rival faction. A delegation from the West African regional body ECOWAS is due to arrive in Ouagadougou, I think they did yesterday, to try to help restore calm following the country's second coup this year. Both are triggered by worsening insecurity with frequent jihadist attacks. After seizing power, the new military leader, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, said Burkina Faso faced an emergency in every sector, including defense. And the government of Uganda and the United Nations Refugee Agency say a surge of refugees fleeing conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo is tearing apart families and stretching aid resources. UNHCR says officials were prepared to help some 68,000 Congolese refugees expected in Uganda, but now 150,000 are predicted to arrive by the end of this year. Congolese refugees stream across Uganda's western border with the DRC to escape nearly a year of fighting between M23 rebels and DRC government troops. And all right, so other refugees were not, of course, others are not lucky to cross over, and the UNHCR says 71,000 refugees have since crossed into Uganda from the DRC since January, and the number is expected to double by the end of the year. And UNHCR's Uganda representative Matthew Krensel says as a result, resources have been overstretched. We go back to Burkina Faso, and the West African mission that went to assess Burkina Faso's situation following the coup left Ouagadougou confident despite gatherings by demonstrators who criticized its visit. The delegation on Tuesday met Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the military leader who on Friday overthrew Colonel Henry Damiba, who himself came to power in a coup in January. They met at the Ouagadougou airport, where dozens of demonstrators were calling for more Russia cooperation and chanting anti-France and anti-ECOWAS slogans. Former Niger President Mahamadou Issoufou, who was part of the Economic Community of West African States ECOWAS delegation, as a mediator, said they would stand by Burkinabe people in this very difficult ordeal they were going through over the weekend. He had said the country was on the brink of collapse. It followed the toppling of Colonel Damiba, who had seized power in January, by the 34-year-old Captain Traoré. After initially opposing his removal from office, Damiba agreed to resign on Sunday and left for Lomé, the capital of Togo. The coups have been triggered by worsening insecurity and frequent jihadist attacks. Since 2015, Burkina Faso has been the target of regular attacks by armed groups affiliated with Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State. Thousands have died in the attacks, and some 2 million people have been displaced. We head back to Nigeria, and advertising regulator is suing Meta, which owns Facebook, Instagram and WhatsApp, as well as its local affiliate, for 30 billion nairas. That's about $70 million US. It says both Meta and its Lagos-based agent A23 Resources Limited should pay up because they failed to get adverts on the social media platforms vetted by government before publishing. Meta and A23 Resources Limited have yet to comment on the lawsuit filed by the Advertising Regulatory Council of Nigeria. In a previous social media crackdown, Nigeria has banned the microblogging service Twitter for 7 months until it agreed to a number of conditions, and as of this month, no foreign models are allowed to be commissioned in Nigeria adverts after the government intervened to protect local talent. And still staying with Nigeria, President Muhammadu Buhari says sexual harassment in the country's universities has reached alarming proportions, and law and order agencies are rightly treating it as form of corruption. Speaking at a summit on tackling corruption in the public sector, the President Buhari said he was aware students use different terms to describe different forms of corruption they experience in campus. Mr. Buhari, who did not provide any statistics, noted that the Independent Corrupt Practices and Other Related Offences Commission is investigating and prosecuting sexual harassment as abuse of power in the education institutions. The BBC in 2019 exposed sexual harassment at 2 universities in Nigeria and Ghana in an investigative piece dubbed Sex for Grades. We go to Ethiopia, and the Tigray Liberation Front, TPLF, has accused Ethiopian and Eritrean forces of killing dozens of people, including children, during an airstrike. Getachew Reda of the TPLF say the victims were displaced people who had fled to Adiabo, close to the border with Eritrea. It has not been possible to independently verify the attack. There has not been a comment from the governments in Addis Ababa and Asmara. Humanitarian workers said an airstrike in the area in the area of Tigray last week killed at least 6 people. The Ethiopian government has accused the Tigrayans of keeping weapons in civilian areas. In recent weeks, there has been heavy fighting involving tens of thousands of troops, with reports of heavy losses on all sides. International efforts to push for a ceasefire are continuing. And then we head back to Uganda. Or rather, a story that I read to you on the headlines this morning. And Ugandan Army spokesperson Brigadier Felix Kaluyige, I'm sure it's not pronounced like that, has told the BBC that Uganda has a good relationship with Kenya, and so the Ugandan army cannot invade the neighboring country. His words of reassurance follow a spate of tweets written by the president's son, Muhoozi Kainerugaba, who is also an army general. Those messages had angered some Kenyans and raised an army of Twitter trolls who responded with video and photo memes scoffing at the idea that Uganda's army could invade Kenya. The president's son has since been dropped from his position as the commander of Uganda's land forces, but promoted to the country's highest rank of generals. Okay. I have a lot to say about that, but some social media users have described his tweets as reckless and said that they could lead to a diplomatic row between the two neighboring countries. Among his various tweets, the president's son said he was disappointed that former President Uhuru Kenyatta left power because he would easily have won another election. On Tuesday morning, the president's son said his mission and that of the younger generation as a whole was to work towards an East African Federation whose army he would lead. Kenya's government has not yet officially responded, and Uganda's foreign ministry earlier issued a statement distancing itself from the tweets, but without referring to General Kainerugaba by name. This was not the first time that General Kainerugaba had tweeted controversial comments on international affairs. He previously expressed support for the Tigrayan rebels who were fighting the government in Ethiopia and also commented on the war in Ukraine. And of course, as I said there, Uganda's president's son, Muhoozi Kainerugaba, has been dropped from his position as the commander of the country's land forces. He has, however, been promoted to the rank of a full general, the highest rank in the army. He remains as presidential advisor on special operations. It is not clear if this decision has anything to do with the controversial tweets over the last 2 days. General Kainerugaba has previously been commander of the special forces, which are in charge of guarding President Yoweri Museveni, and General Kayanja Muhanga, who has led Ugandan army missions in Somalia and is currently leading the contingent fighting the Allied Democratic Front ADF rebels in the Democratic Republic of Congo, will take over as the commander of the land forces. Okay, and then we end with some news from Cameroon, and Cameroonian's president has ordered officials to enforce a 2019 law on bilingualism and make life easier for English speakers in the French-speaking majority country. Complaints of discrimination against English speakers sparked a separatist conflict that since 2017 has left more than 3,500 people dead. Civilians assembled at Yaoundé City Council this week to complain about the difficulties they encounter in Cameroon's public offices because they speak only one of the Central Africa state's 2 official languages. Civilians who fled the fighting in Western Cameroon between troops and separatists say they often face discrimination in public offices when speaking English. December 2019 law states that English and French have same value and should be used equally in public offices, and says Cameroonians should be able to express themselves in either language. Jean-Marie Bondo, one of the officials dispatched to enforce the bilingualism law, said people abuse public office by refusing to attend to civilians who speak either in English or French. Bondo said Cameroonian President Paul Biya will no longer tolerate French-speaking workers imposing the French language on English-speaking citizens, and English-speaking workers should also be patient when they receive French speakers in public offices. Bondo also official said all official documents should be translated in both English and French languages, and English and French speakers should be given equal access to jobs to stop marginalization that is causing tensions and threatening Cameroon's unity. That's a lot to unpack there. And that is the latest news from across the continent of Africa. Samuel Tawish, you have been just listening and waiting there patiently. A very good morning to you, and thank you so much for finding time to be with us today. Tawish, can you hear me?
Very good morning to you, Miriam Ogutu from our communication headquarters. Good morning to Miriam, can you hear me?
Yeah, we seem to be having a bit of a connection problem, but it's not too bad. Hopefully it will not be a real problem. So before we get into Cameroon and that diplomatic stir by Museveni's son, let's first look at, I think, one of the things that I came across here in one of the dailies in the Kenyan stories over here, and that was Wetangula. Now, the issue Speaker Moses Wetangula has to rule on MPs are divided and who between President William Ruto and Azimio leader Raila Odinga has the majority of elected members in parliament. Azimio claims outright majority and rejects the defection of 9 MPs from UDA, UPIA and MDG to the Ruto camp because they're, according to the agreements they had with these other smaller parties or everybody that joined the Azimio camp coalition, they signed an agreement, and if you want to leave, then there are proper procedures for you to leave that agreement. So according to Azimio, these parties that have purported to since have left are still bounded by the agreement they signed. Okay, so it was so much so a fight that Speaker had to take some time off to go think about how he was going to make this decision. So Wetangula puts off decision on majority. So this is not, is it so hard to know who is the majority in Parliament? I thought it was an outright. Is there any ambiguity in how the members are aligned in Parliament?
Thank you so much, Miriam, and a very morning to you from our communication headquarters. And good morning also to our viewers who are watching this program in Kenya, Africa, and the rest of the world. Miriam, I want to hope that you can be able to hear me now clearly.
Yes. Go ahead.
Well, thank you so much, Miriam. And I think, Miriam, as regards to what you've just read in the dailies today in Kenya, as regards to that matter that was being canvassed yesterday on the floor of the House, particularly in the National Assembly, it appears to be a very dicey situation, a delicate matter for that case, because again, by the end of the day, the Speaker of the National Assembly has to make, to give a directive, or rather a ruling that will be, that one is guided by the dictates of the law, especially on the Elections Act. And secondly, Miriam, it also has to appease, of course, both the Azimio coalition as well as the Kenya Kwanza coalition by the end of the day. Because again, if that doesn't happen, then we are likely going to see this matter really taken up to the courts. And I think just to avert that, the Speaker of the National Assembly really needed enough time, probably to retreat and have a time to be able to go through maybe the submissions yesterday by the lawmakers on the floor of the House. But secondly, also to try and see what are some of the maybe the parameters as envisaged in the Constitution, in that we're not going to have a backlash coming from different quarters, and especially from the lawyers. Because, Miriam, again, I foresee a situation where this matter is going to end up in the courts. Because as it is, when you look into the Elections Act, all the Azimio affiliated parties are really bound. They're under obligation to really stick together, regardless whether they have pronounced it otherwise. Miriam, they are still bound by that Elections Act and the agreement that they did sign up until the lapse of 90 days from the time we had the election. And as far as I'm aware, Miriam, as we speak now, the 90 days are not yet over. And that in itself means that all these formerly parties that were affiliated to Azimio remain as such. Apart from, unless maybe someone would want to give a different interpretation altogether. But Miriam, there's also what appears to be a lacuna in the Kenyan constitution, in that you could even see people, for example, who have been nominated by President William Ruto to go to the cabinet, the likes of Aden Duale and other legislators, who, by virtue of having been elected as members of parliament from their respective constituencies, have also informed the numbers that now we are having a debate on the floor of the House. But these people have been nominated, and clearly you can see they're still even in the National Assembly, still debating about the same matters, and still even informing the question and the debate, the battle about the numbers and the supremacy about which coalition exactly or political party has the bigger number. The same applies even to the Senate. You see, Kipchumba Murkomen has been nominated to go to cabinet, but he was there, and by virtue of him having been elected primarily as a senator for Elgeyo Marakwet, is what informed the numbers, the majority numbers in the Senate, and that's why they have been able to take over the seats of the majority leader and also the majority whip, Miriam. I think there's a very big lacuna, and once this matter has been settled, whichever way, whether through the through the verdict that Speaker Wetangula will be issuing, that is tomorrow, or whether it goes up to the courts, we'll really want this matter to be addressed so that in future we do not want to find ourselves really webbed in a web of uncertainty, as is the case today, because we want some level of clarity as to what exactly constitutes, say, for example, majority or minority in the assemblies. And secondly, what are we going to go by? Is it the coalitions, political parties arrangements, or is it individual political parties arrangements? Like is the case today, Miriam. If you went to the National Assembly, you realize that United Democratic Alliance, UDA, has a bigger majority in terms of an individual party, followed by ODM. But again, when you get to the coalition arrangement, Azimio has a bigger number. They form the majority in the National Assembly. So which way are we going really to follow? And when you get even into the Election Act, it recognizes both the scenarios. It recognizes both the political parties and also the coalition of parties. So I do not understand really how the Speaker of National Assembly, that is Moses Wetangula, is going to navigate and come out with what should now be termed as a Solomonic wisdom, because by the end of the day, we do not want our House or the National Assembly to be divided just by virtue of this ruling. And I also want to hope that Speaker Wetangula is not going to rule this maybe based on his political favoritism or persuasion, because again, we understand he got into that position by virtue of support or sponsorship from the Kenya Kwanza allied politicians or leaders, and therefore that should not really dictate, because now he's the Speaker of the National Assembly of Kenya and not for Kenya Kwanza. So he has to be very, very careful about the kind of verdict that he's going to make. Whichever way it goes, it must be convincing, it must be persuasive enough, and it must be anchored on our law. Thank you, Miriam.
All right, thank you so much, and also thank you for reminding us. A few of the members of Parliament and Senate, I think Kipchumba Murkomen, Senator, who were nominated for these cabinet secretary positions, have they resigned? Do you know of any word if they have resigned from their positions, from their elective positions that they held or they hold?
Miriam, virtue of common sense should have dictated that these leaders who have already been nominated really to go for cabinet portfolios should have resigned as we speak now, so that they can concentrate on facing those who are going to vet them. And it's actually, I would say it is a double-edged kind of scenario where you have lawmakers who are supposed really to be out there really concentrating on how they are going to be vetted, again coming to Parliament and conversing with the same lawmakers who are going to vet them. And so by the end of the day, we are not going to expect even so much in terms of maybe quality kind of vetting. It could just be about rubber stamping, because these are people who have known each other for so long and for a very long time. They are buddies in one way or another, and even by their continued stay in Parliament, whether in the National Assembly or in the Senate, in itself also is going to have maybe an influence in terms of how the vetting is going to pan out. But I think the constitution does not envisage a situation where they really have to vacate their seats before they have been confirmed, because once the vetting has been done and Parliament has approved their names for a consequent appointment by President Kenyatta, I think that is the time now where they will have now to tender the resignation from their respective elective positions, because as it is now, they remain elected leaders up until they would have been approved by the National Assembly, because what remains then will just be now formal appointment by the appointing authority, in this case, President William Ruto.
And of course, it's easy to assume that of course the appointments most likely will go through, and those areas will have by-elections. But can we just assume that it is people from the UDA or candidates from the UDA or affiliated to UDA who will be elected in these positions, or is there a possibility that that matrix, even in terms of numbers, might be affected based on how the by-elections will go, or we just assume, UDA will get replacements to these positions by the same party? Can we just assume that? Because we're looking at the numbers now.
Really going by the history and our voting patterns in the country, even in the previous general elections, and also in this respect, the by-elections, we do not expect quite a major shift. Maybe you're going to maintain the same pattern as it were, because if you went to Bungoma today, where now the Speaker of the National Assembly was elected as Senator, that is Moses Wetangula, you'll likely see a scenario where a person who is allied to Kenya Kwanza, or Ford Kenya for that matter, will likely clinch that seat. The same applies to, say, Kipchumba Murkomen, the senator for Elgeyo Marakwet. You wouldn't quite expect that maybe an Azimio candidate will be able to pull any surprise in Elgeyo Marakwet, and for that matter. And that is why you see, President William Ruto has been very, very strategic in terms of his appointments. That he was not just going to fish out people from every other corner, come this side or join this, nominate them to cabinet. Take, for example, a case of, say, Nyanza, the larger Nyanza region. You've not seen any of the leaders, whether they are allied to President William Ruto or not. None of them really has been nominated or proposed to get into any cabinet, any portfolio that needs them to relinquish their seat so that they can go to yet another by-election. And there's somebody like Eliud Owalo, we all understand, is just a communication consultant, comes from Nyanza region and specifically from Siaya County. So this one, we are not going to have any, say, a by-election or something in Siaya County. But as for Bungoma, the president really knows that this is the perceived home turf of Moses Wetangula for Kenya. He's commanding a very big following. He's been senator elected. This would have been his third time to be a senator there. He's been an MP in Sirisia, I don't know how many times. And so we'll largely expect that anybody who is leaning on the side of Ford Kenya and maybe Kenya Kwanza as a coalition is likely going to clinch that seat. And the same applies to Elgeyo Marakwet and say other places that we have seen the president really nominate these people. So we wouldn't quite expect any surprises, but you cannot quite also rule out there's a possibility of somebody else, say from Azimio, maybe pulling a surprise, because we don't know exactly the dynamics with which those particular leaders were elected during the general election, and maybe things are likely going to change. But given the president comes from UDA and from Kenya Kwanza, there's also that influence in terms of a psychology on the part of the voters for them to appear to be leaning on the government of the day, given that now William Ruto is now the president. So they will play that card, even as they will be carrying out with their campaigns, that look, do you guys want to be in opposition for the next 5 years, or will you want to be in government? So here is President William Ruto, I beg your pardon, with his UDA party, with a candidate so likely going to win those seats.
All right, very well, thank you so much. So we just, I guess, sit here and wait how that Solomonic wisdom will prevail through the speaker, Moses Wetangula. That's a very interesting scenario. Then, of course, we should be following that story, and we'll let you know what happens. Okay, so Cameroon's president has ordered officials to enforce a 2019 law on bilingualism and make life easier for English speakers in the French-speaking majority country. Complaints of discrimination against English speakers sparked a separatist conflict that since 2017 has left more than 3,500 people dead. All right, so I'll not read the whole of that news item because I just did that a while ago. So we do know that the language, but really the problem between the Anglophones and the French-speaking majority of the government of President Paul Biya is much more than just a language. It's not just French and English. It goes farther beyond. You've had people from there complain about economic marginalization and the systematic discrimination and things like that. I think the language falls right into. So there was a national unity talks, something like that happened, and of course in the way that that was organized, I don't know how effective that was, but one of the key things that was agreed upon during that meeting was that now there should be a law that enforces, that when you go to a part of the country where they speak majority French, which are the majority in Cameroon, then, and if you're an English-speaking person from the southwest part or the southeast part, then there are supposed to be interpreters and other officials there who can address you using a language that you understand, be it English or French or vice versa if you're visiting the other side of the country. But that language has not been enforced since 2019 after that meeting happened. I don't know why do you think this has taken so long, and is it too late now that President Paul Biya has said we need to start enforcing this to ensure that everybody feels included in this country so that we are able to address the issue of disunity? Has he handled it well? Is it the right start to perhaps finding a solution to this ongoing crisis in Cameroon?
Miriam, in as much as this is really come up a little bit late, because these are things that they are more like fundamental rights, and I do not think why it should have taken all this long. It should have taken such kind of course, meetings for Cameroon, and particularly the leadership of President Paul Biya to see it fit to really have this being anchored even in the constitution itself, and so that it doesn't appear like it's more of goodwill coming from the political leadership of the day. That is not what we would have envisaged by the end of the day. But more important things that they are eventually finding reason really to accommodate some of the issues or listen to some of the grievances that the people of southern Cameroon, and particularly the Amazonians, have been agitating for quite some time, Miriam. And you've quite ably really amplified the issue of marginalization, the feeling of being disenfranchised, especially by the people of Amazonia. And the so many ills, that place remains so much undeveloped in as much as it has a very big potential, especially when it comes to agriculture. And so you will expect that President Paul Biya would have really tapped into this potential and seen how to develop Cameroon as a whole. But because, his has been more of a systematic effort, really sure that these people continue being marginalized, that they continue being disenfranchised, that they continue their rights being stifled. You will not want anything that appears to be an empowerment. That is why you see even schools in this part of the country really remained closed for a very long time. Roads are in a very pathetic situation. The economic situation, especially in this part of the country, is also not that appealing. So, Miriam, I think President Paul Biya must now find reason. In as much as it's taken too long, they usually say it's better late than never. Now that it's slowly but gradually realizing that I think this is the right thing to do, and even if he is planning really to exit power, he may want to exit honorably and with dignity, and maybe leaving behind a legacy, because this agitation has been there for so long. It has seen so many people lose their lives. It has seen so many people being displaced, property being destroyed, and also even the young kids who are a future generation, also their lives just being destroyed, because if they are not able even to attend schools, if they are not being able even to enjoy the basic of their rights and even get the basic of commodities, Miriam, in itself is really a very big marginalization and disenfranchisement of our population. So it's good that President Paul Biya is finally finding it important to do this. But we want him to go beyond this, because it is not enough to say maybe we are going to allow, say, interpreters, or to allow a few of these rights. I mean, all of these rights must really be agreed upon and be captured in the Constitution, so that it's not about, the goodwill of any leader. And by saying that, Miriam, also, it is important that in as much as we all do this, there's been that agitation by the people of Amazonia for all this time. I think with this kind of platform, it is important to bring all these things on the table and try to listen out to the issues and the grievances that these people have, even away from the issue of the language barrier. Because in a population where you have half almost speaking, one being Anglophones and others Francophone, it is not just right to conclude that the rest of the national country must then have to speak or communicate or have, say, French as the only language that we will use, especially when it comes to public discourse and other matters. So it is important also to accommodate the interest and the issues that are being raised by these other groups. It's very, very critical, Miriam. These are fundamental rights, that it's not just a matter of goodwill coming from the political leadership.
Okay. Yes, indeed. And I think something that you've said that I'd like to underscore, the issue of agitation by the Anglophones who have been wanting and seeking to secede because of so many other factors outside of just the language problem, but also other factors that I think we have outlined there. And they've been seeking to secede. So when this national dialogue, I think that was the right name, when this national dialogue happened in 2019, the leaders of the Anglophones actually were in jail and still are. I think they were given a life sentence. So this dialogue happened, I think, between government and itself, because the people who the government was supposed to be having a dialogue with as far as national unity is concerned were in jail. So the Anglophones are not fully represented, or rather the people who are the leaders of this agitation, who are the leaders part of this conflict, were not represented in this national dialogue. They had already been sentenced, and remember, they were civilians, but they were sentenced in a military court. I know you know how that happened in the wee hours of the morning and all that. Even the proper procedures were not really followed. So they're still serving a term. I think they've tried to appeal their sentencing, but that has not worked out very well for them. So the national dialogue happened. The government came with its own agendas and decided this is 1, 2, 3, 4 we're going to talk about. And it was not really a dialogue that really everybody came to the table and everybody was to speak or bring the issues that they feel should be addressed as a national dialogue, as far as national dialogue is concerned, to be able to really solve the issue as far as this conflict also is concerned. So the government did set the agenda, and of course the government said secession was not part of that conversation. But even with the government trying to implement this bilingualism law and trying to make everybody else feel that this will solve part of the problem, but this is just on the shallow deep, don't you think? It's just on the shallow level, because the issues that plague that place are way deeper than just the language they speak. So do you see as if there's a will from the government or Paul Biya? I don't know if it has anything to do with the recent visit of French President Emmanuel Macron in Cameroon, that maybe you told him to, try to do something and, clean up and damage control. I don't know if that has to do with that, or Paul Biya really is now wanting to unite, to leave a united, Cameroon, or I don't know. Will this solve even half of that issues that we see plague that issue, and the issue, of course, of secession? This seems to be something that the government is not willing to entertain.
Miriam, It doesn't really matter how dark it has been for the people of Southern Cameroon or Onions, if you like. One thing I'm very certain is that I'm in a new door will actually one fine day. It may not the kind of braveness that we have seen with the people of Ambazonia really tells you people who are determined and the people who are not going to compromise what they believe is the fundamental rights really to pursue rather that which they think is rightfully theirs. And the dictatorship that is President Paul Biya Miriam will one day really come to an end, because we have seen some of the worst dictators before, the likes of Charles Taylor. We've seen the likes of Mobutu Sese Seko and so many others that I may not mention here. But by the end of the day, they really came to an end. Even in the Gambia, I remember what happened when we are having that election and transition, when President then Yahya Jammeh did not want really to relinquish power even after he had lost that particular presidential election. But by the end of the day, he really had to leave. It doesn't matter how long one wants to stay in power. That is not very important. It does not matter how much you're going to stifle onto the people's rights, how you're going to suffocate people's freedom and rights. By the end of the day, if you have a population that is enlightened and a population that is as determined as the people of Ambazonia today, it will certainly come to an end and the people of Ambazonia will have freedom. You know, this is a topic that it's so dear, I am passionate about. It is something that it is such a despicable medium that in this century you can have a leader who, one, does not want to leave power, but secondly, even in the face of continued stay in power, he wants to have a stronghold on the people that is leading. He wants to continue dictating, maiming, committing genocide on the innocent civilians just because of power medium. These are not the kind of leaders we really want in this continent of Africa. But there's something interesting you mentioned, the issue of French, and this is the external hand, I believe, which is also playing a very big role in terms of maintaining President Paul Biya in power and continued disenfranchisement, Anglophones, and the people of Southern Cameroon. But I can tell you, for all these years, the people of Ambazonia have never really given up in this fight, even in the face of the arrest of the leaders, of its leaders who are supposed to be in the lead in terms of, say, for example, leading the negotiations about what will be the way forward for this crisis. I mean, they have never really given up. But I think what President Paul Biya was doing, he thought, by maybe arresting and imprisoning, putting to jail these leaders, maybe it will dampen the spirit of Amazonians, or by the end of the day, they'll have to submit to his dictatorial kind of leadership. But I'm very happy that the people of Amazonia are not actually kneeling down to President Paul Biya. They are not giving up. In any case, they appear to be emboldened. They appear to be their morale is bolstered every other lapsing day. And they feel like this is just but fuel even to make them continue agitating for their rights. So I think the freedom will finally come for the people of Ambazonia. It will come. It may not be today, it may not be tomorrow, but eventually it will come. And for President Paul Biya and his accomplices, I can tell you for sure, Miriam, that one day will pay and a very big price for the sins that he has committed on the innocent civilians in Cameroon, and particularly on southern Cameroon. Miriam, I submit.
Okay, thank you so much. And of course, this is also another story that we shall be following. And I do understand you're passionate about it. I know we've been very much invested in what is happening there in Cameroon, and not just in Cameroon, but indeed across the continent of Africa. Now let's get into this diplomatic star that was raised by one brigadier. I think a very spoiled, I don't want to use that word, but let me just read through. Ugandan Army spokesperson, Brigadier Felix, has told the BBC that Uganda has a good relationship with Kenya, and so the Ugandan Army cannot invade the neighboring country. His words of reassurance follow a spate of tweets written by the president's son, Muhoozi Kainerugaba, who is also an army general. Those messages had angered some Kenyans and raised an army of Twitter trolls who responded with video and photo memes scoffing at the idea that Uganda's army could invade Kenya. The president's son has since been dropped from his position as the commander of Uganda's land forces, but promoted to the country's highest rank of general. Some social media users have described his tweets as reckless and said that they could lead to a diplomatic row between the two neighboring countries. I know you've been following this, and Tawish, I know you have the details. I'll not even read the whole thing. What do you make of this story?
Miriam, it is such unprecedented and it's such a very serious and weighty matter that one will not want to treat such casually. The way, I mean, the son of Museveni is called Muhozi. I don't know the exact name. But again, how he was able to make all these tweets on such a very serious and very sensitive matters that even relate hugely on the diplomatic ties between Uganda and Kenya. It remains a lot to be decided, Miriam. And how he has even given the responses he has given, that he was making a joke out of all this. I cannot understand if it was an ordinary Ugandan or even an ordinary comedian, maybe you'll attempt or struggle to understand them. But for the person of the rank of General Muhozi to make such kind of tweets and for him to come out later and say he was just making a joke out of it, and the way it looked so serious, and the way it looked so the cabinet nominee for foreign affairs, that is Dr. Alfred Mutua, even had really to go up to the Ugandan High Commission in Kenya to try and meet with the Balozi to try and get to understand exactly the gist of this matter and whether this is something that the government of the Republic of Uganda has really sanctioned, because he's a very senior government, a high-ranking government official in Uganda by virtue of his military status and by virtue also of being the son of the sitting president. He's in the first family. So you cannot understand how he can come out and make such kind of tweets and come out later to just refute and say he was just trying to make a joke out of it. Miriam, there are certain jokes that you don't just need to treat them so casually. Sometimes they say where there's smoke, there's fire. And perhaps this was just trying to test the waters. Maybe there's a wider scheme. And I do not want really to be that pessimistic or to believe that that Uganda is planning anything negative against Kenya. But if there's anything, then I think to some extent it must have put the security apparatus in Kenya on high alert. And I'm very sure even President William Ruto must have picked the issue with the President Museveni, because their buddies won. Kenya and Uganda have enjoyed cordial ties for a very, very long time, save for some years back when they wanted to hive part of Kenya up to Naivasha. And you know what the first president, that is Jomo Kenyatta, did as regards to that. So I do not really want to believe that this was a very serious matter. But again, we cannot just wish it away and say it is a non-issue. It's a very serious issue, and we'll want a very serious response and commitment from Uganda government, especially on this matter, and for them to assure the Kenyan population and as well as the Kenyan government that there's no hidden agenda or there's nothing sinister they are planning against Kenya. But be that as it may, Miriam, if there's anything, God forbid, I can tell you Kenya is prepared anytime, any day, anywhere to protect her territory and her sovereignty, and any attempt, not only by Uganda, by any country, anywhere. I do not think that Kenya will take it lying down. I can assure you that they will be ready anytime really to respond appropriately and accordingly. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So I don't know. I have so much to say, but I think I'll just I'll be diplomatic. I'll be diplomatic. But anyway, so he was removed from that position as the country's commander of the land forces, Uganda's command of the country's land forces. He, however, was promoted, okay, to the rank of a full general, the highest rank in the army. He remains as presidential advisor on special operations. So he is punished on one hand, and his bad behavior and indiscipline is being rewarded on the other hand. If this was an ordinary general in the Ugandan army, do you think they would have been able to get away with this? Or because he enjoys the privilege of being the president's son?
Miriam, there are a lot of dynamics that are at play in as far as this matter is concerned. Because one, this is no ordinary civilian in Uganda; he's a high-ranking official. Especially when you talk anything to do with military, you understand what I'm talking about. And if you just wake up one day and say because of ABCD, then you have just to be sent home. It doesn't happen that way. Maybe if it was just any other ordinary government appointments or such, maybe we would have seen a more serious action. But away from that, Miriam, also, it should not be lost to us that Muhoozi, or General Muhoozi, is a son to President Yoweri Kaguta Museveni of Uganda. And all indications are he's grooming the son really to take over from him. Unless maybe whatever kind of indicators that we are reading
Okay, we apologize a bit of a
leading, but every move step Museveni has been in fast with the son from ranks to ranks, and where he is today.
Okay, your network. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
It was.
Yeah. So
go ahead.
Yeah. So the reason why you've seen President Museveni really elevate the son from rank to rank within a very short period of time, it does tell you that there's a lot behind the scene. It's more strategic, so that by the time Museveni leaves power, he will want to see that the son is really close to power itself and is able really to navigate his way in terms of taking over from the son. How he's going to do it, we are not very sure, because again, maybe there are other cards that is playing, hidden cards that we are not very sure about. Does he want to? Is it going to happen through, say, for example, an election, or are we going to see a coup? Because those are also not vocabularies in Africa today. Maybe there's such kind of plans to have the son really take over from him. Because when you see the kind of the diplomatic that and stern action would have been taken against him.
Very well. We are really having a problem with your connection, Samuel Tawish. We apologize for that. Yes, indeed. General Muhoozi Kainerugaba, I think, is one entitled man. They're from Uganda. The father is the president, so I think he just feels like, he can say, and this is not the first time that he's gotten himself in trouble as far as diplomacy is concerned, because there's a time he tweeted that that he
Hello?
would, yeah. Oh, okay. You're back. We keep losing you there. Previously, he expressed his support for the Tigrayan rebels who are fighting the government in Ethiopia, and also commented on the war in Ukraine in ways that were not very good. So this is not the first time he got himself here. So as much as he's being groomed from what we've been seeing happening, and I think those rumors have been swelling, that he's being groomed to take over after his father, I think this level of entitlement, this level of indiscipline, I don't know if this is what Ugandans are getting ready to have as far as leadership is concerned. If at his level he really cannot understand the aspects of diplomatic relations between countries, and he will be careless and joke in this matter, I think this is not something that should be treated as a joke. It shouldn't. Once upon a time, there's a president in Uganda known as Idi Amin, who also had a similar vision, as Tawish reminded us earlier. He had a similar dream of annexing part of Kenya and getting it, merging it with Uganda or something like that. So this is not, as much as he tweets a lot and he jokes a lot. You don't joke about things like this, General Kainerugaba. You don't do that. So this, I think, should be addressed with the seriousness that it requires. And of course, the Ugandan government has quickly come in and has apologized for this without even naming his name. They have said they do not support, and and Kenya has no intention. Uganda Army spokesperson, has said Uganda has a good relationship with Kenya, and so the Ugandan Army cannot invade the neighboring country. And also the Foreign Affairs Ministry has come out to issue the same statement. He should apologize, and he should retract these comments, and he should perhaps be taken and be taught that you don't joke about certain things. You don't talk about certain things, especially having the position that he has. But what do I know? He is just an entitled, spoiled son of a president. Yes, I said it. There in Uganda, and I think they made money through his dad. He has that power, and it has gotten into his head, and I think he really feels that he wants to be the leader of that country, but that is for Ugandans to decide. And I think just too much power has gotten over his head, and he feels he can say whatever. But I do know that he loves coming to Nairobi. He loves Nairobi so much. So there's somebody who was joking back and saying, maybe he was just expressing his love for Nairobi, and I don't know what else he loves when he comes here in Nairobi. I don't know, but there are people who know, and there are places he loves going to, and specifically those areas he mentioned, that will be Westlands area and some other area. He's always there when he visits Nairobi, and he's always in Nairobi, especially during when President Uhuru Kenyatta was the president. I don't know if he's visited yet since the new administration. And so he loves Nairobi, from what we know. So if he loves Nairobi and he wants to relocate, or he wants to be spending more time here, that is what he should have said. But to say that, he can take over Nairobi in 2 weeks if he wished, using the Ugandan army, that was a bad joke. That's not even something to joke about, okay? We have enough problems in this region, all right? So you need to stop. And you need to stop tweeting. Somebody needs to get that phone out of his hand, I think. And he needs to be taught. And the fact that he was removed from that position but also awarded, you award bad behavior. He's never going to learn. I know he's older. He's over 40 years. The other day he had a birthday where roads were closed and heads of states were invited, and he was being celebrated. I know he was turning 42 or something. So he's a fully grown man. Behave. That's what I'll say, and I'll leave that there. Okay. All right. So I think that I don't know if there's any. Oh yeah. Let me just look at the latest from Burkina Faso, and the coup that happened over the weekend, and of course the former leader who led the coup in January that removed President Christian Kabore. Is it? Yeah. Christian Roch Kabore was removed in January. Now the army leader, the Lieutenant General who led this, Henry Damiba, left the country. He's in Togo now. He was ousted also over the weekend. And of course, now we have Captain Ibrahim Traore. I think he's 34 years old or something like that. And ECOWAS visited Burkina Faso yesterday to assess the situation following the coup. And they left Ouagadougou, that is the capital of Burkina Faso, confident that despite gatherings by demonstrators who criticized ECOWAS's visit, there are a couple of people who gathered to protest the visit of ECOWAS, because the ECOWAS delegation came to Burkina Faso to try to talk to the new leader, that is Captain Ibrahim Traore, and try to find out what really is going on, and what is their motives, and what is it that they're planning to do as far as transition is concerned. The military leader who on Friday overthrew Henry Damiba, who himself came to power in a coup in January. They met at Ouagadougou airport, where dozens of demonstrators were calling for more Russia cooperation. So this is where this is what really drew my attention. When you look at the events and these countries that are in turmoil, and a lot of them are former French colonies, and you see the level of insecurities that have engulfed these countries, and you see how France has been really struggling to try to keep the friendship and keep the diplomatic ties and bring in the help that France feels this country needs, and also this and the other. But that has not worked very well in a few countries. We've seen Central African Republic now, the French mercenaries are there, they've taken over, and I was telling you the other day, French mercenaries, the Wagner group, are the ones who are providing even personal security for President of the Central African Republic. Imagine that. And then we do have them now in Mali after French, army left the contingent that was there to try and help the fight of insurgency. All these countries have issue to do with insecurity and the insurgency of these extremist groups, terrorist groups. So in Burkina Faso, it appears to be another script here, and has all the markings of what we've seen as far as the proxy wars and the war that is up there in Europe, how now it is playing out here in the continent. When you see demonstrators calling on for more Russia cooperation, of course, these are protests that were organized. I don't know if they were sanctioned by Russia. I don't know. You even begin to wonder, these new leaders, the new captain Ibrahim Traore, who sponsored him, who supported him, which other outside external power supported this move? Because quickly now you see people have turned and they're supporting him, and the next thing you hear, the people do not want. Of course, French has messed up this country, so I wouldn't be surprised, that the people are carrying placards and saying, we don't want any more cooperation with France. We want, Russia and all that. But it is these two players, Russia, of course, Russia, and now the West, because France represents, the West, and Russia also from up there. So I think this is a very well-crafted proxy war ongoing here in Burkina Faso, and the people who are going to suffer are the people in Burkina Faso. And what I find to be interesting is that the West African mission, that is ECOWAS, left Ouagadougou yesterday very confident that perhaps the new leadership will help with the transition. Remember, Damiba was not keen on having a civilian transition in 2024. Initially, it was supposed to be earlier this year, and then he pushed it, not earlier this year. They're supposed to work on a framework because the ousting happened in January earlier this year. So they're supposed to work on a framework, on a transition government to start organizing for an election to make sure that Burkina Faso leadership goes back to a civilian president. But that has not been the case, and I think Damiba and his Ike, tasted power and realized, what, this is good, so we might as well just stay here just a little bit longer. So they were not really interested from what they've been doing. And even the ones in Mali, they're not really interested in handing over power. You see that? They're not interested. So in Mali, France made so much noise, and the leadership there said, what, you might as well leave. So they expelled the French, head officials who were working there and all that. And finally, I think even the French ambassador left or something like that. And it is the same script playing out in Burkina Faso. Russia has everything to do with this. France has everything to do with this. It is the proxy war, but now they're targeting. So these countries where France used to be their colonial master, and France still has the ties with this country. These are just the targets by Russia, to try and neutralize France's power in these countries and other Western powers, especially in Africa, because we know that Africa is the next frontier. Everybody's just coming back here, so who can get the most influence. We've seen even how China has been advancing its foreign policy in the continent, and now Russia. So I don't know if we're being played or we've just been caught up in a pawn game, and I don't know who's going to lose or win at the end of these very dangerous maneuvers that we see these foreign powers make here in the continent. But I think this is something that we shall be following and see, and how this will end. So ECOWAS were happy to meet this new leader, which is quite interesting. And he has said that he will, the Captain Traore, he even, I think on Friday after he took over, he said, on Saturday, he said that he is, I don't know, he will restructure the army. Who restructures the army of a country? If a country requires its army to be restructured, you have a problem. You need a stable army in a country for you to be safe. So if army in Burkina Faso requires structuring according to this new leader, we are looking at a very prolonged civil war that might break out in Burkina Faso. Army is the last thing you want to mess up with in a country. It is what assures the security of the country and its people, protects the sovereignty of a country. So if you want to set a country out on fire and have a disunited army, because I'm sure some of them are just watching. The ones that were allied to Damiba are just watching. The ones that were allied to former President Christian Kabore are just watching. So they're just waiting to see what will happen. And if this is continued, if a military rule is continued further in Burkina Faso, this country is very fragile right now as far as its stability is concerned. So I think the next best thing would be for this new ruler, military ruler, junta, to organize for an election so that the country can go back to a civilian rule. That will be the best option for Burkina Faso right now. But if he continues and decides that he wants to restructure army, whatever that means, and perhaps extends further his term past 2024, there's going to be a serious problem. Even 2024 is too far. They should facilitate a rule back to the civilian as quick as possible. Otherwise, we'll see coups and counter coups, and before we know it, Burkina Faso will plunge into a civil chaos that we will not even be able to salvage this country. And where Thomas Sankara is right now, I'm sure he's very unsettled. He's very unsettled, because of what Burkina Faso is turning out to be. And we shall be following this story, and we shall be bringing you the latest, of course. So I want to thank you so much for your time this morning. I want to thank Samuel Tawish. He had a bit of a technical hitch, so he left a bit earlier. But he had so much to say about the stories that we had for you this morning. My name is Miriam Ogutu. Enjoy the rest of your day. Good morning.